that? Richard Giffen from the Historic Preservation Commission. Hey, look, what you looking to do with preservation? Not yet. No, but we did like. He said he would come to. Did you say that? Don asked you to do it. Yeah, Don. Okay, so Don's unavailable apparently, and he asked Richard to present if you want to. Great. All right, I've got my cup of tea. Here we go. There we go. We have 4 people. We don't have a quorum yet. No. Well, it's only 6:50, but we're streaming already, so.
Yeah, and I just did that because I had a problem last night, so I wanted to get it going early. Yeah, that's why I came on early, just to make sure it all works, because it's my first time using this system, so.
Yeah, same. It was the same with me the other day, so I'm glad that you're on too, and we'll make sure that everybody comes on.
Yeah, speaking of that, is there any tools we need to use on this? Like, do I need the chat? Do we need to do things on the chat to type them in, or are we just going to do it verbally? Or how are we going to?
I need regular minutes. That's why I'm actually sharing the screen, and she's going to put the minutes on her laptop. So Eileen, we're gonna hear you type, so you're gonna have to mute. I'm gonna tell everybody to mute unless you're speaking.
Yeah, I can mute unless I need to, speak.
I think we'll just have to slow it down a little bit, right? I mean, right. I mean, it's just.
Like you said, trying it out with this one where there's not too much going on.
Yeah.
Is a good idea.
And I think everyone's just going to have to understand let one person talk and, however people are recognized or however it'll work. And, we'll get into a group just like everybody else has. It's our first time. We'll get the bugs out. We'll go from there.
And it looks like Jim Hill just joined us because I see it.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Hey, Jim.
How you doing? Wait, dare I turn my camera on?
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Of course.
I dressed up.
There you go.
I find it a little overly reliant on faces, right? Like you want to see people's faces. Like I see Karen smiling right now. You want to see that, and we'll have meetings with 40 or 50 people on. And people are like, oh, it's too confusing. I'm like, it's not confusing. When you speak, your face gets bigger. When somebody else speaks,
right. Oh, look, Richard's gone on his own little thing.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Giffen.
He's the professional up there, look, with his headphones on and everything.
God, he looks like he's going to be like, do you have a turntable underneath you?
I do have some beer. Is that all right? Can you have beer?
No beer. No beer at a public meeting.
Well, I'm not there. I'm a member of the public, so.
Oh.
He does have all his
How about the seltzer?
lined up behind him very nicely.
Yeah. How you, Todd? All right? You're
All righty.
safe?
I think if I look out, when I stand for the flag salute, I might be looking at the same flag if you can see Anne's flag, because that's the flag I'm going to be using for our flag salute.
Okay. Yeah, I'm the wrong way.
Brian has arrived. Where's Brian? Let's see.
Hey, Brian.
There's Brian.
There he's not. There he is again.
He's looking professional too. Look, headsets.
It is interesting. It is interesting, though. I mean, I know we have 6 minutes, and we are streaming right now. So it is interesting, though, how technology, you're a little apprehensive or a little uncomfortable. Like, what can people hear? What can they see? I keep looking over my shoulder to see what, to understand my whole aura that's behind me. I'm used to having that picture of George Washington crossing the Delaware behind me.
So Todd, you were talking about commenting before. What we did last night at council, if somebody is joined in on video, they needed to send a text to the chat, kind of as, raise your hand by sending a chat. They still have to identify and state the usual stuff, name and address. And if they're on phone, And we only had one person on phone for part of the meeting last night. And I don't see anybody on phone on this meeting.
Well, Edna's gonna call in on phone, I believe.
Yeah, so once you identify her, you can do that, and then you can leave her unmuted or whatever. And I did what we talked about before. I was kind of going through saying, caller 1, you're on.
Right.
Start calling.
Right.
I don't know any other way to do it, unfortunately.
And I see an RC, that must be Bob Clerico calling in, and I see a phone as well.
Yeah, we got Bob Clerico, and I see Mark, too.
Mark is on, too.
I don't see Mark, I see a phone, but then again.
Yeah, that's Mark.
He might be calling in on his cell phone, maybe.
Bex, I don't see a video for him.
He's on phone.
Yep.
Mark, can you hear us?
Wait. Nope. We got a caller.
Hey, Mark.
You get that feedback and you have both your phone on as well as your computer. You get that feedback when you have your cell phone, if you called in, and you have your computer, because the feedback is coming from the two speakers and the microphones.
Okay.
Oh, that was Rob? That was Bob? Okay. And now,
Still have one caller.
I don't have control over muting folks. You have that.
Yeah, I have it.
Can you give that to us, Betsy?
What?
There you are, Bob.
Yep, I'm here.
Bob, are you actually in your office? Wow.
I am, but I'm the only person in my office.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always the only one there, too.
So listen, I'm going to hit the record button.
Well, it's funny. I sort of yearn for being able to go into my office, but nobody's allowed. So.
This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you. So we're going to start. We have a quorum, I guess.
I'm still seeing about 2 more minutes. I'm 6:58.
Yeah, I have
Okay.
6:58 as well.
My computer must be really fast because it says 7:04. Sorry.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'll set that.
You just want to get the meeting over with.
Now, who's caller 1? Do we know?
I thought that was Mark. Somebody said that was Mark, because you can turn that into Mark as long as you know that that's Mark.
No, but I haven't.
Yeah, I don't have a video, but I'm on the phone.
Okay, so Eileen, if you can change that to say Mark.
Okay. Yes, I can.
So now you have 2 Mark Haynes, by the way.
Okay.
I'll put Mark.
Now I see. Yeah, his line now says M for me. So.
Jeremy.
Hey, Jeremy.
Hello.
Hey, so now you have 2 Mark Haynes, by the way. You have Mark and Mark Haynes.
Mark is. I think that I just made Mark as the caller 1, and Mark Hayne is still up there as on a computer.
Let's just make sure, is there any non-board member or professional that's called into this meeting right now? That's it. That was Mark.
Hey, Eileen, I logged on with the computer, but I don't have a camera in case you're showing documents, so that's probably why you see both.
Oh, okay. Yeah, your Mark Hain is actually like a blank screen, so that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, because I see two screens for Betsy, actually. One has her video and the other is blank.
One is the live stream or the recording.
Ah, okay.
So do we, now I need to count like the Brady Bunch. Do we have a quorum that we can start? 1, 2,
We do.
5, we do. Do you guys want to start?
We can. I've got 7 o'clock and I've got a quorum, so.
Alrighty. All
Is
right.
Susan joining us as well?
We should, but you know, everyone, let's give a minute. There's Beth. Hi, Beth. And, you know, every once in a while, it takes some folks to get on. I mean, I know it's 7 o'clock and we should be starting, but let's just,
And Jay too, I would think Jay's probably gonna log on.
right. If you remember when you tested it the first time, here's somebody, there's Susan. N-A.
Dave.
Dave. Hi, Dave.
Dave.
Yes, Dave.
All right, so I think we should start, okay? So I don't have a gavel, but I have my hand. We're going to call this meeting to order. This is the regular planning board meeting of the Borough of Flemington. The date is April 14th. It is 7 p.m. This meeting is being held in conformance with the Open Public Meetings Act. All rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
United States of America. For the Republic. For which it stands.
Indivisible.
Well, it's hard to do that as a group.
I like that.
And I do have to thank my neighbor whose flag is still flying because it's still somewhat daylight out.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So I thank everybody for joining us tonight. Obviously, this is something new for many of us. And so this is a virtual meeting. And we are making sure that we keep all land development aspects moving forward. As you know, we don't have a heavy agenda this evening, but depending on how long the crisis lasts, we may have applicants that we need to make sure that we can still fulfill our duties and make sure that applicants are being processed in a timely manner. So, Kara, I thank you. Kara did a tremendous amount of research with the municipal land use law, what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do, and so on and so forth. But essentially, we're going to make this meeting almost the same as if we were all sitting there together. So I'm going to let Eileen call roll. And then after Eileen calls roll, if I could ask everybody to mute their lines, and then we'll unmute one at a time so that the recording as well as Eileen can take accurate minutes. So Eileen, you want to take roll?
Eileen, really quickly, before we take roll, I just want to make note for the record that this meeting was published on the website and in accordance with the requirements of the DCA guidelines that were recently issued in order to allow these public meetings to take place and to provide guidance to the land boards as to how we can go about doing this. So all of the necessary steps were taken, and it was published on the website, and everyone is advised as to how they can participate both as members of the board as well as the public in this meeting.
Thank you, Kara.
Go ahead, Eileen.
Okay, Mayor Driver?
Here.
Mr. Long?
Here.
Mr. Campion?
I'm going to speak up. Mike's trying to get in. I got a text from him, so he should be joining us. He was the person on the phone.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cook?
Here.
Mrs. Engelhardt?
Here.
Mrs. Pedrick, I believe, is also going to be calling in. I haven't heard from her yet.
I spoke to her about a half an hour ago. She was going to try to call, but I don't know how you know whether she's there or not.
She would show up. She would show
okay.
up.
I don't know if it worked or not.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Budney?
Here.
Mr. Hain?
Here.
Ms. Giffen?
Yeah.
Mr. Hill?
Here.
Mr. Norton?
Here.
Ms. Kaczynski?
Here.
Mr. Clerico?
Here.
McManus?
Here.
And Mr. Troutman?
Here.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, so just from a procedural perspective, I guess all these meetings are a little bit different for those of you who have been running virtual meetings. And I will make sure that that I call on anybody because it is a lot easier when everybody's on mute. And I will absolutely make sure I will watch for hand raising, whatever, you know, go off mute if you need to say something. And we'll make sure that we keep track of all comments. So with no further ado, let me go into item number 1 on the agenda, as it always is a slot for public comments. Are there any members of the public that would like to make a comment virtually, or were there any members of the public that emailed in, Eileen? The email deadline was 3 p.m. today. You're on mute, Eileen. You're going to have to unmute. There you go.
Mr. Cook, I did check my my email for my official email as board secretary, and I also checked the public comments email that was set up for public comments that was on the noted on the website, and I have received no emails for this meeting.
Okay. With no public comments being made, let's move on to item number 2, mayor comments.
Well, it's been an interesting month. I'm happy that we are starting to meet again.
You're still on mute, Betsy.
Oh, you missed my long dramatic pause. So it's been a long month, as you can imagine. I'm happy that we're trying to get back to some sense of normalcy. We had our second council meeting, actually our second and a half, I'll call it, because we did do a real quick special meeting early on to approve a couple of things to make sure people could continue to get paid. So we had that last night. Things are moving. As I mentioned to council last night, a month ago, I kind of expected that this might be maybe a month of disruption. It's becoming clear it's going to be a much longer than a month. So we'll have to make sure we continue to stay focused on the business of governing. I am appointing a committee that will focus on the business of governing, made up of various members from across the borough. I will let you know who that is, and there will be probably most likely a planning board representation as well, so that we can kind of prioritize. At this point, I've been kind of kicking ordinances down the road, thinking that it would be temporary, and that's part of the thing that we're going to have to consider. When we get into the subcommittee reports, we need to have a very long heart-to-heart conversation about the master plan. So I'm looking forward to having that as well as where we might be going throughout this public health emergency. And that's it.
Thank you. I'm sure it's been stressful. I cannot even imagine, or I can, but thank you for everything.
I have a few more gray hairs that I did not expect when I raised my right hand 1.5 years ago.
Yes, I bet. All right, moving on. Item number 3, council comments.
Yeah, hi, everybody. As the mayor said, we have been having our council meetings, and the only thing I have to report is that, originally we had the ordinance for the overlay. We were at a public comment. So many people showed up to Borough Hall that we had to move that date. That was in violation of the fire code. So we moved it later on to the courthouse, and unfortunately we had to cancel that as well. So right now we don't have a new date because everything's so up in the air. So whenever you do get back to, post-pandemic life, have a date, and what's going to happen is the people who live within the area related to that ordinance will receive certified mail. They'll get notice for the new date, and I would assume that we'll have
Excuse me. Hey, could I ask anybody who's not speaking to go on mute right now? We've got a lot of background noise from somebody. The only folks that are not on mute right now are Susan, Mark, and Mike. There, everybody is now on mute, except for Susan and Jeremy.
Okay, so did you hear? Hopefully you heard all that. That's all I had.
Okay, thank you. HPC comments. I believe we have Richard Giffen from the HPC.
Yes, yeah. I'll turn my camera back on now. Can you see me and hear me? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So yeah. Thanks. So Don couldn't be here today. He's obviously working for the state and he's on call 24/7. So he asked me to do a quick report. So we're obviously very impressed that council and you are using this remote meeting format. It seems to be working well. So we're going to be doing the same. But it's too soon. We have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow, but that's been cancelled. So our first remote meeting will be on 6th of May. Our last meeting was actually 19th of February. So like everyone else, we've been in a bit of limbo, but we want to get back to doing what we can in these difficult times. You might have seen our HBC postcard went out recently. So that actually came to our house today. So a lot of you should have got that. That focuses on the large house. Obviously, a lot of things are being cancelled. We did have some Rutgers training lined up for the 25th of April, but that's now been cancelled. Not sure rescheduled date. And then also we do have a spring talk, walk and talk, which was going to be on the 9th of May, but we're obviously going to postpone that. I think the main focus we're going to aim towards this year is the certified local government, which I think we mentioned before, which is registration with SHPO, and then that helps us hopefully get more grants and support from SHPO. So we have no applications right now, so pretty quiet. That's it. Thanks, Todd.
Thank you. Thank you. I would have assumed that the HBC would have been very proud since you guys are somewhat leaders in being able to convert to electronic medium. So I'm glad that you were proud.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to item number 5, approval of the minutes from the March 2nd, 2020 regular meeting. I need a motion and a second.
I'll move.
I'll move.
I'll second.
Eileen, did you get that?
I have Mayor Driver as the first and Mrs. Engelhardt as the second. Well, roll call. Mayor Driver?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Campion?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Engelhardt?
Yes.
Mr. Budney?
Yes.
Mr. Hain?
Pedrick.
Oh, Mrs. Pedrick, is this, she's on the phone, I think, as caller number 4?
Mm-hmm.
No, we're just going over the minutes from last meeting.
Okay.
Let me unmute. Let me just note for the record that Edna Pedrick came on and joined at, I have 7:13 p.m.
And Mr. Campion also, I think that was a little bit later than my original roll call, Kara.
Okay. Mike came in as well shortly after roll call.
I was on at 7. You couldn't hear me though, but that's okay.
Okay. We got that.
Never late.
Okay. I think we're at Mr. Hain. Did I get your call on minutes?
Mark, you're muted.
Move on to Ms. Giffen.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Hill
Yes.
and Mr. Norton.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Item number 6 on the agenda this evening are discussions on the subcommittees that we had put forth in the beginning of the year. And right now, I believe most are in receipt of a are in receipt on something for traffic that was led by Jim Hill and Jay, and the math from something up from McManus on Kyle McManus with Susan on the master plan, and Mark. I don't believe you shared it, but you did have input on rules for citizen input during planning board meetings. So if I could, Mark, can you summarize? Let's start with Mark, because I think you'll have to distribute to the board some of your findings. But can you just summarize where you are with looking at rules for citizen input, and then you can distribute to the board your ideas? You're on mute, Mark. Still on mute, Mark. Eileen, can you tell, is he still there? You're on mute, Eileen.
Yeah, Todd.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, you hear me now?
Now we can hear you.
Okay, I unmuted on my.
That you did work on with Kara, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So yeah, if you could just send it to Eileen. Eileen, if you can distribute it to the board just as, talking points, we'll put it on the agenda for our next meeting. And so thank you. Let's move on. Jim, can you give an introduction to the comprehensive parking and traffic study that you spoke to Jay about, and then we'll let Jay speak?
Yes, I was able to get a hold of Jay last week to ask him if he was ready to present something to the board, at least in list format, which he did very well. And then I added to his task by asking him if he could take a borough map and mark it up so that we could take the list and look at the map and know where there were going to be various actions that are proposed to be taken, such as the traffic counts. I don't think we got as far as we wanted to on areas for parking. I'll turn it over to Jay this time.
Okay, Jay, you have the floor.
Thank you, and nice to see everybody's faces tonight. I just kind of prepared hope was an exhaustive list of different things that would be in our toolbox as traffic engineers, tasks that we can do, questions that we need to discuss, and I guess what I'd like to gain a better understanding of, since I'm kind of the new guy on the block here, is what are we after with, what do we want to know about parking in the town? What's our goal with parking? And then the same thing with traffic. What would our end game be in terms of wrapping our hands around traffic issues? And just a couple ideas there would be in terms of parking. Maybe we want to manage our parking a little bit better downtown and have something that we can point to when we're making a decision on an application that tells us, where's the parking going to be for this application? Because in a downtown district, a lot of times the sites don't have the parking on them, and you're depending on common supply. And do we have that? And then same thing in terms of traffic. We want to look at, as things come before us, are we asking for, contributions, or I guess contributions is the best way to put it, or improvements to get us to a certain place in terms of how we want intersections to look.
Well, so I get that. Thanks, Jay, for that intro. Let me just help, and then I'll let you go through the list. I believe it had come up last year at council on, we use the word comprehensive parking and traffic together combined, as well as looking at it as part of the circulation element of the master plan, to be able to say exactly what you just said. When an applicant comes in and presents us with a traffic report, they typically are required by statute to give us the traffic surrounding their, traffic patterns surrounding their parcel, looking at their parking, and it's somewhat in isolation of the rest of the borough. So we really have never done what I use the term as a comprehensive parking and traffic study to be able to look at, holistically the entire borough. And I think you put it quite eloquently that to be able to say, where is the parking, and where are potential hotspots, and where are potential intersection gradings, if you will. So yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. So why don't you just sort of take us through your thoughts on your list here?
Okay. So I'll just go through the list, and then maybe, Todd, you could open it up for questions. You could, manage the questions after that in the discussion. So if I was doing a parking study, obviously I'd want to determine the scope of the study. One idea I had was, is it the business improvement district area or not exactly? So we would talk about that. As part of the study, what we would typically do is inventory the parking supply that's available, the regulations. I would want input from this board and whoever else knows when are our crunch periods of parking in town, because I don't have a total understanding of that myself. I have some guesses. And then once we kind of focus in on those times, we could look at, how much of our current supply is being occupied at those peaks. Then we can take a look at where is our future demand going to come from, and then finally come up with some kind of strategy for how we would manage the current supply, and also see if we need to add to that supply and how we would do that. So I don't know if we want to pause for parking or just keep going here.
Well, why don't we pause and guys, if there's any input that you can offer Jay based on those 7 items that he just listed, why don't we let me see how we can do this. I'm looking for any movement or hands.
Okay, so when this came up at council previously, it was literally trying to do a parking inventory off-street and on-street. How many parking spots do we have? Where are the demands, i.e. neighborhoods, and this might be outside of the scope and might not be anything we really want to get down into the weeds on. Where the demands are, where residents don't have off-street parking, and where if we do a variance on parking, the impact that those residential folks may have if we allow people to not build the required amount of parking. Ultimately, and it's not that big of a secret, that if I had my druthers and if I could snap my fingers and say this is how it's going to be, we would get rid of parking minimums in our business district. But we also have to pay attention to what the odor flow would be going out into the neighborhoods as well, and so I'm sensitive to that. And I think the peak demands, I don't know that we're in the situation to be all that concerned about it yet. In a couple of years, when we have some more development, that might be something we want to take a look at more. As well as then the potential future parking demand generators based upon development and current zoning. Obviously, that's a need, especially if we were to look at eliminating somewhat some of the business district parking minimums for commercial parking as well. I know that our abundance of parking does make us an attractive investment site. I've heard that. I heard that from one of the investors that was looking at the filling station. That's what caught their eye, the fact that we had plenty of parking and it wasn't metered. So, and also ultimately the previous master plan reexamination did recommend perhaps a parking structure in the downtown business area. So is that still something we want to look at as society and culture has changed, and we're not, Huntington County, we're always going to be somewhat dependent upon cars, but there's a lot more car sharing going on as well now. So is it as important to have all that parking? So that's my thoughts on it.
Thank you. And Jay, just to piggyback on that, I think the other piece would also be to incorporate any electric car parking, whatever, I'm not sure the exact term, where that should be, as well as, I know there have been suggestions in the past to have a parking authority of some sort. And I mean, I would just like it to be part of the report that would have a recommendation on whether or not you felt, as a traffic expert, those 7 points, plus what Betsy had just said, and as well as the need for a parking authority, or the benefits or pros or cons of parking authority.
If I could mention one thing, the one thing I haven't heard yet is shared parking, or the ability to have two lots that are close together, be able to share parking on a legal basis. Have we looked at that at all in the past?
That was Jim Hill, for the record. I just want to make sure that I'm not sure we have, Jim. I mean, I know we have we always look at easements and parking, shared parking amongst a mixed use lot and block. But I think really it's studying our parking, Jay. Like what are the issues with parking in Flemington? I think you've hit the nail on the head. If you add some of those pieces thus far, I think you'd have a somewhat comprehensive look at parking in the borough.
Right, we seem to have a lot of, as Betsy mentioned, got a lot of parking spaces, but they're so not hooked together, or marked or signed, or we don't know which is public, we don't know which is private. I think that's probably one of the things that we would end up working the day on, is the public versus private type of parking that we could maybe allow. So many times you pull into a parking lot and there's 6 signs there saying you can't park here if you aren't my customer. We have to work on that. Not that it isn't good, but maybe we ought to make sure that there's a minimum of parking for each business that is kind of dedicated to it during the peak hours, and then it becomes general parking in the off hours.
I think we could also work with the FCP on that, Jim, just from a business owner perspective. I like all those ideas.
Todd, if I may add,
That's
during snow events, the main parking lot behind 8 Main Street is overflowing, and the parking lot at headquarters, until we closed it off towards Spring Street, was overflowing, and Borough Hall parking lot overflows. So there's a definite issue around those areas.
Mike, has anybody ever approached Victorian Plaza about theirs? Because their lot's usually empty 90% of the time yet.
Not that I'm aware of. But I know Matt's Red Rooster had residents parking in his lot during snow events. And in Flemington Furs parking lot right off Bunnell Street to the left. So there's a major parking issue around the Broad Street, Spring Street area.
Okay.
So Flemington Furs no longer owns those Flemington Fur lots. Those are now owned by Mr. Cust. I believe they have closed on that property. The FCP has been encouraged to do some new parking signs, International Blue P signs as well. The other thing, we do have 4 spots that will be built hopefully this summer, depending upon how the public health emergency shakes out, for electric car charging via a grant that the borough received from Sustainable New Jersey. Also, anybody who comes, like for instance the Agway properties, as we're putting together the redevelopment agreement, they're all being told that they have to include electric car charging spots as well. And we can certainly, talk about, in some instances, I don't know if the Agway would be appropriate for the shared parking, as Jim mentioned, but that's also a conversation that we had with current development.
Susan?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on both what Jim and Betsy had said. First of all, Jim, your comment on, if we've ever talked about shared parking. And I think this is where I think Beth and Kara, Beth mainly, we would need some feedback on. Yeah, of course, we've encouraged shared parking with previous development. The problem is we always get a lot of pushback and feedback from either our council or their council that shared access and parking agreements across property lines can get hairy legally. And so most developers that we've ever dealt with, most small developers, obviously in this town that we've ever dealt with, were not willing to put those types of kind of cross agreements into place. So I guess, first of all, the question would be to Kara, and I'm not asking you to answer this question, but I guess in the future, I would like to perhaps see council encourage or even require, if we can, cross agreements with neighboring, parking. So that, for example, Matt's Red Rooster is required to provide parking. Let's say they're just building that building and the parking lot's there, and they're required to share the parking on Mondays when they're not using it. I'd like to see in the future our approvals for development to require cross agreements as opposed to asking, because frankly we've asked many times before and it doesn't happen. And I guess as far as Betsy's comment goes, I think that one, part of Betsy's comment is I think when we were looking at Jay's recommendations that he put in that he just read off to us, I think there's some low-hanging fruit there that we could accomplish as well, and then some long-term goals as well. The low-hanging fruit I think we could accomplish is simply changing the ordinance. Like Betsy said, we can't necessarily get rid of the minimums, but why can't we lower the minimums for different, like if we require 2 per X amount of square feet for these type of uses, we now require 1. Every single application we do on Long Main Street, there's usually some sort of variance that we issue, and we never have an issue issuing those variances. And I do think in just kind of the established parcel sizes that we have in this borough, we're always going to have some sort of variance because parcel sizes vary so much and are small. But can't we get some low-hanging fruit, or maybe in the master plan, Beth could recommend some simple ordinance changes that would lower those requirements in general? That's it.
Susan, I'm asking, are you asking for that before the study takes place or after the study takes place?
I'm asking Beth to advise us what kind of easy ordinance changes would be able to do. And then for Kara, honestly, I'm just asking her to kind of encourage cross property line agreement in the future. But I'm being a little more cynical about that because we've never been able to convince applicants to do it before.
Yeah, as far as that goes.
Just the one thing that brought this a little bit to my mind is when you guys went through the reapproval of the lights and the parking and so on down behind the senior housing on Church Street, where you were requesting that they cut through from one parking lot to another. And I went, okay, that's the right idea. Where else can we do it, or where can we do it? I think just to helps the flow of traffic, it keeps it off Main Street also if you have parking lots that are connected.
Okay.
That's a perfect example, Jim. Just to do that was painful. And unfortunately,
I understand.
It is painful. But so I'd encourage carrot to try to encourage those type of cross agreements in the future when we can. But as a low-hanging fruit, I think that at least we could lower the requirements, the minimums.
So folks, we've talked about that. This is Beth. We've talked about that a number of times of ways that we could make small changes to the zoning ordinance that would adjust the parking requirements. For example, eliminating or reducing parking requirements for existing floor area so that when folks have a change in use, it doesn't trigger a parking variance. Alternatively, we could identify some of perhaps the most common uses and review those parking requirements to see if that's a quick change we could make, similar to some of the access ordinances that you just referenced, Susan, requiring, I think right now it encourages, but we could require that an access easement be provided. Of course, we can't require that the adjacent property owner respond, much less provide it in kind, but there are some quick ordinance changes that we could make to help address parking and access concerns, and that could be done perhaps in advance of a larger study. They would certainly not be comprehensive, but it would be a quick change that, depending on exactly what they were and how they were worded, they could be quite meaningful.
One of the things that I think, thinking along those lines, Beth, is the fact that I think what Jay listed is a very aggressive study that would be pretty complete for the borough by the time it's done. I think in the current environment we aren't going to be doing any traffic counts. So maybe what we're looking at for this year would be what would satisfy you as a circulation study to begin with for the master plan changes within this list of items that Jay had. And then the second thing is the traffic actual counts and so on are not inexpensive, even though you do an awful lot of it electronically. That might have to be budgeted over a couple of years. Am I right, Jay?
Yes, definitely right on the point about traffic counts these days. We're out of business right now because there's no traffic. But there is some minimal stuff that we can start looking at, maybe even just getting a handle on what our actual inventory is a good start.
Okay. Anybody else on the parking?
What the minimum would be that Beth needs for the circulation study for the master plan to be, I think we need to meet with her virtually to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly some parts of a circulation element. I think that could happen now. We can talk about classification of roads, roads that are in need of repair, but obviously anything regarding traffic volumes is going to have to be placed on hold unless we have existing data that supports recommendations, previous data. Can we, I don't know that there's a need for it in the borough, but can we look at geometry of intersections without cars flowing through it, or do we need the traffic for that too?
Well, we haven't got on to traffic yet. We're still on parking.
Well, okay. Sorry, I'm thinking about the larger circulation study, but I mean, we could certainly do a count of parking spaces, but there's obviously a flip side, which is the demand that we won't be able to address. But if there's a desire to move forward, maybe there's some value to getting some of this data now and then supplementing it, hopefully in the summertime when folks are parking and traffic's moving again.
I would think so.
And then just quickly, Todd, I'd like to get information on that access easement that Jim and Beth was talking about so I can kind of understand what's been done before and what we might want to look at that Susan was talking about going forward. I mean, obviously, if we have an applicant that's coming to us with parcels of property and they're making representations that they're going to have access via another parcel, in those situations, we can require that they provide us with written easements, etc. We can't require, like we talked about, adjacent property owners to provide access if they don't want to. But maybe I can get a handle or understand what Jim and Susan and Beth were talking about that's been done before, and keep that in mind as we do go forward. We could always make the ask, just in certain situations we obviously can't require it.
Another thing that we could do is, between myself, Bob, and Jay, we could look at some adjoining town ordinances to see if there's anything that's already been done.
Okay. All good suggestions. So Jay, why don't you keep moving on with your 6 elements to a traffic study?
Okay. For the traffic study part, I attached, it's kind of a crude map, but it helped me just find certain key intersections. So that was the 3rd page of the attachment. And before that was just a list of all those little red circles. And that's basically just my kind of guess at where there might be hot spots and intersections we might want to look at, but I'd really like to cut that back, and obviously I'd also like to hear, you know, again from the experienced folk, if there's something that I'm not finding on the list. Again, we would want to know, when do those hot spots occur? My guess would be weekday afternoons, and maybe on Saturday midday would be a typical time when a lot of things overlap. Sometimes if you have a lot of restaurant uses, you can even get stuff on weekend evenings, peak ramping up in terms of parking, usually not traffic. Again, find, you know, what problems do we have in town? I haven't, again, been around enough to hear what the problems are. And then when you look towards the future, consider what's in the pipeline development-wise. It'd be great to learn more about that. Some of those intersections I identified are in areas where there could be redevelopment. And then as part of redevelopment, what kind of roadway infrastructure might get completed. There's some dashed lines I threw in, you know, if Spring Street were to get extended, or, you know, some other things like that. You know, what does that entail? And then sort of the third group of stuff on that first page is just all the specific tasks that traffic engineers do. Getting to, for example, Beth's point about geometry, we would need to load the intersection up with traffic to understand if we have adequate lanes and geometry to process the traffic. That's sort of the capacity analysis piece that we would do. You look at safety by looking at crash data. There are sources of data that we could get right now without having to take fresh traffic counts, and that can also be expensive, so you want to leverage as much of the existing data as you can. You can get some general good data from automatic counts, which are the road tubes, or 24-hour counts. That gives you the patterns and when the high times are, and that's fairly inexpensive. And then sort of the bottom items are just more of the analysis piece, the capacity of the roads, taking into account existing traffic as well as trip generation from development projects. And then that sort of gives you an answer about where, you know, there might be future concerns if we allow certain development, without getting improvements in place.
All right. Anybody have comments for Jay on the traffic portion?
My only comment was I think probably Jay and I need to work on a 1-2, and with Mike work on a 1-2 year process so that he can try to work out a budget for you guys to do A and B this year and something else next year, just because of the money it's going to take.
So I'm going to jump in.
Susan, you have a comment?
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I had 2 comments for Jay. Number 1, I think Dave and Betsy and the rest of the, and Beth and the rest of the Liberty Village redevelopment team would definitely want to have the access between the end of Stangl Road and Route 12 be on the list of access / intersections that we would want to study. Being that that's a major area of focus right now for development. And of course, right now, that's a right in westbound right out westbound. I think if if the development moved forward in the way that we all would hope in the next decade, I think that intersection is something that we really need to look at. And I think the other two areas of concern that I'd like Jay to add to his pretty exhaustive list there is the impact on the school, and I know Karen could, I'm sure, will agree with me 100%. Obviously, the intersection of 31 and Highland is Raritan Township, but the intersection of Highland and Elwood, is Elwood? Yeah, she's nodding her head. And basically, the whole circle there in the mornings, heading over to the high school is extremely difficult, as well as school drop-off and pickups around the intersection of Park and Court and Allen, and I guess that's Kapner or Thatcher Hill. The ins and outs of Riffus, of the intermediate school. Those intersections are really an issue around town during school hours. For the high school, it's mainly in the mornings, but at Riffus, it's in the mornings and in the afternoons. And I think we may want to take a look at some traffic. If we're going to add a bunch of intersections, those I think are definitely areas of concern. But
I would agree, Susan, if I can just definitely agree with what you said about Highland for sure, and just reiterate your points and add to them. Absolutely, it's in the morning. It becomes 2 lanes of traffic, and in some ways that traffic situation has helped to exacerbate why we need the road replacement that's halted right now temporarily. But it does cause a lot of traffic damage on these streets, and I think it's something that could be, as part of the study, possibly involve the schools involved in that, because be involved in discussing what future issues might be. And certainly it also ties in, Susan, to the parking situation. When there are large events, it causes different parking situations. And we also have, of course, we know we have the restrictions on the school children parking on the streets quite close, but that does mean they know exactly where they can park, and they do park within the borough and walk this way too. And so in some ways we have a tie-in to pedestrian study, simply because a lot of the kids walk down the street rather than some sidewalks that aren't existent, for instance, and that could open us up to issues. There's several issues that tie in with the school being so close, for sure.
Yeah. I'd say there's a pedestrian issue, safety as far as Highland and Elwood and Pennsylvania and Elwood for pedestrians. Traffic is more New Jersey, Highland, and Elwood, and then traffic and pedestrian on Court and Park and Allen and Kapner. So if Jay could just take those notes down, and then maybe we could get whoever the liaison for the schools is on the council, Betsy, get them involved as well. I think those locations should be added to Jay's list. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry to interrupt you, Susan.
No, I was done.
Yeah. Without the school being in, that's probably going to kick down the road at least until September, if not into next year, regarding the schools. I would also recommend that we take a better look at the entrances and exits into town, particularly with the Courthouse Square and that deficient parking study that was done. How will people get into town and out of town, whether that's Emory Avenue, New York Avenue? And I'm not quite sure how to send that down to you, Jay, because the ends of those streets. Karen, are you the last house in the borough on Highland?
No, well, almost. My neighbor is half and half.
The ends of those streets are not actually in the borough, which, and being that it's a state highway 31 and kind of adds a new wrinkle. Thank you, Susan, for mentioning the Stangl and Route 12. That's certainly a huge issue. One of the major
Yeah,
issues.
I think that's even bigger than the schools, frankly, as far as what we can do to influence.
Yeah, and that's a high impact spot. Frankly, and I'll put it on my wish list, and I'd love to see a light there, but it's too close to the tracks, so not quite sure how DOT would handle that. However, with that in mind, one of the other issues I think that should be prioritizing, and whether it's extending Church Street or kind of putting a little turn onto Central Avenue, how to join Central Avenue and Stangl and Church down there around the area of the brewery.
Yeah, actually, that's right. Thank you for reminding me. I mentioned that to you. Thank you for remembering that. I appreciate that so much.
And I have ideas as to how that could be done as well, rather efficiently. Jay, I know you mentioned like Spring Street, and until we see some movement there with cut glass, I don't know, if that needs to be prioritized at all. Of course, if it's a once in 10-year study, then it should be prioritized. But that's my opinion, where I think that we need to be looking at. The other issue is mine and Park Avenue is a little bit of a trouble spot as well.
Mm-hmm.
However, there's no accidents. It's just an intersection a lot of people complain about. Of all the ones we talked about, the two that have the most high impact areas within the business district, other than Church and 31 and Rayville and 31, would be North Main and Ferran and Stangl and Route 12. That's probably where we see the most accidents at.
I think I remember also we have the county's involved on several of those roads. Am I correct?
Yeah.
No, we have no county roads in the borough.
Yeah, but no, that would be state Route 12. Yeah.
Yeah.
And state 5.
I think that's what I want to stress to everybody, because I know that was a conversation that you and I had about the I'll call it the Fulper/Church extension. I want everybody to understand, and again, especially the Liberty Village Redevelopment Committee, to understand that the success of any development in that area is not only going to depend on the access from Route 12 in and out, but also the interconnectivity of either and or Church and Fulper with Stangl. There needs to be some sort of internal connection between that area of Turntable and the area of Stangl, and it needs to be north of the railroad tracks, just for logistics to avoid anything with the railroad. So that's what my suggestion and discussion was with Betsy offline. And going forward, I'd really like to make sure that the long-term redevelopment of that Liberty Village area takes that really important traffic access into their consideration when they're doing their redevelopment plan.
One more thing to throw in. Is there any life left in the fact that the Black River and Western may become more active? Still the possibility of actually getting enough people in the borough or within Raritan that could create a transit village type of situation where we could have our own train going to Somerville?
Well, that's always been in the master plan, and certainly not something that I'm willing to take out of it at this point, but I don't think that's necessarily a realistic short-term goal. But long-term goal, it's certainly not something that we should take our eye off the ball on.
Yeah, I think you leave it in there. Whether or not it happens in our lifetime remains to be determined. Frankly, the conversations I've had with NJ NJ Transit would be, I'd love to see a bus, If we can't get a train, at least give us an NJ Transit bus that takes us to a train station. I do know that I think that the owner of the Black River Western Railroad would like to see some expansion outside of the tourist industry. He does move freight, and I suspect that he'd like to be moving a lot more of that. But whether it should remain in Nevada.
He was pretty heavily involved when we were doing a study maybe 10 years ago that was trying to look at the possibility of activating it. He was even at the point where he was trying to do his improvements to meet the standards for NJ Transit to come into town with a train. So that fell by the wayside, unfortunately. But there was a lot of discussion went on. There was a lot of meetings with North Jersey Transit, with Mr. Holt and a few other people trying to help us out to get that thing going, but it fell apart mainly because we couldn't develop the ridership at our end.
So let's just try to stay on topic for just to give Jay clear direction, because I feel like I don't want to give Jay. I feel like what we've just given Jay is such a tall task that we won't be able to afford it. But that's just my. Jay, what it appears, based on what the board's conversations are, is that you would need a more accurate map with board input to be able to see the study area. But I think by and large, I marked up my little map that you had given us, Jay, and it essentially is almost every road in the borough, maybe bar one or two that's not touched. So, are you able to take the recommendations given by the board and come up with some kind of menu approach from a costing perspective?
Yes, I think the input was excellent. I took a couple pages of notes here listening to everybody, and I'm thankful for what everybody said. So yeah, I will try to distill this down into something, where, like Jim Hill said, we could start in on some of it and, have another phase in year two, that type of approach.
Yeah, because I do think that from a circulation perspective, we're going to see that in the master plan, and then there may be pieces that are just part of an overall study. I think, like I said, the word comprehensive scares me a little bit, just based on knowing what potential costs could be, but I don't want to make that an impetus. I mean, a comprehensive study is a comprehensive study. So, but I might ask that, Jim, if you were taking notes as well, that we get a more detailed map of the borough that we can start marking up, just like Jay did on his, I think you called it a crude example, Jay, whatever you, analogy you use, or adjective. So, and really just start marking these things down, because it sounds like there's everything from potential new roads and connectors, as well as issues with parking, as well as issues with circulation. And if you could have all of those inputs, you might be able to make more educated recommendations. So, Jim, can you get with Jay and get a more detailed map, and we can start literally marking up the map with the comments that were made from the board members this evening?
I would say yes. I think there are larger scale maps that we can use, which would be a lot easier nothing else, just draw on them and get the thing set. An awful lot can be done in PDF format, so it's not like it needs to be AutoCAD, but if we had a good base map, that was probably 24 by 36. I think that would be suffice. And I believe there is something in the borough files between what Beth has been doing and so on as a planning map and so on that probably would help.
Okay.
You can also reach out to the Office of Planning Advocacy at the state level and ask what kind of GIS mapping they have. They have a ton of stuff, and they have, because we still are, at least until June, and I expect that it'll get extended due to the COVID-19 emergency. And we'll be working on it, have the center designation, and one of the benefits of that is access to the GIS mapping folks at Office of Planning Advocacy.
Understood.
And Jim, the borough also has topographical mapping of the roads.
That's what I thought, Bob. I was going to ask you that next.
Okay.
I have one last comment regarding Jay's scope. I honestly, when I saw his map that was sent out, thank you, Eileen, yesterday or this morning, I actually thought there were too many circles on the map. I think we could pare that down a bit. I think the number of intersections to study was actually a little bit of overkill. And I think that, frankly, Jim and Jay can talk, and Mike can talk to each other offline and kind of identify eliminating some of the smaller intersections that he identified on that map, and adding in some of the ones that we talked about, obviously.
Yeah, I think, Jay, you would hit the majority of these if you took that one suggestion of understanding that any downtown DB1, DB2 redevelopment would require egress and ingress out of the borough. So once you look at how people are going to get out of the borough, I think that's when you get a lot of these side streets. And I'd like to just understand how that, if there are connectors, and maybe there's connectors that we don't even know of, like we spoke of on Church Street, that would allow more smooth flow of people coming into the borough and out of the borough. So if we looked at it that way, you'd be able to determine where the hot spots of your circles would be.
Okay.
Okay. And Beth, do you have enough for what you the suggestions that Susan had made on simple ordinance changes to be able to give us a quote as to what that would cost?
Yeah, I think I do. I would expect that I'm going to put together a proposal, and then we should talk about it to find out if it's exactly what you guys are looking for. But I think I have enough information to put together a draft, and if it's a scope that everybody's comfortable with, then we're good to go. And if not, we can chat about it. But what I'll probably do is identify specific changes that I think we can take care of that suit the qualifications that are sort of quick and easy, but pretty meaningful.
Okay. Okay. Is there any other comments on the proposed study? Okay. So Jay and Jim and Mike, I look forward to you guys, getting back together again and coming back to the board with a next step. And obviously, if you need to call myself or Susan or Betsy or anybody for that matter, just to get more input, please feel free to do so. Okay.
That's good.
All right. Let's move on. Thank you very much. That was a great conversation. Let's move on to the proposal for the master plan element that came from Beth, I think through Susan and Betsy. Beth, you want to take us through what your thoughts were?
Sure. So the borough's interested in doing a comprehensive master plan, and what that means is that it means that there are a lot of different options. A comprehensive master plan can include 10 different master plan elements. Some of these are more important than others, depending on the community. Some towns are going to look to the conservation element as being the most important master plan element to help them address their current challenges. Other towns are going to look to the circulation element. In Flemington, I put together a proposal that addresses all of the master plan elements, with the exception of a couple that I think are really not applicable to you guys. The first one is farmland preservation, for obvious reasons, and the second one is transfer of development rights. That is not a program that anybody has talked about in Flemington, and frankly, it's not one that I would recommend here. It's very costly, very cumbersome, and has the biggest impact is most appropriate for rural or maybe suburban municipalities, not for a built-out town like Flemington. So, given those few things, I put together a proposal addressing all of the other master plan elements. And a couple of things that I think are important. There are 3 elements that are generally that are required for municipalities master plan. The first one is the goals and objectives, and that is exactly what it sounds like. It's just simply a recitation of goals and objectives applicable to the town. The second one is the land use element, which addresses land uses existing and proposed in the municipality. And then the last one is the housing plan, the housing element. So I put together the proposal to address the goals and objectives, the land use element, as well as the other optional elements. But I've excluded the housing plan. And I did that because you guys just did that in 2017. It's actually gotten approval from Superior Court. And I do not recommend that we use this process as an opportunity to try to undo the settlement agreement and the court's approval. I think that's just a very poor idea. I can go into more detail if anybody disagrees or is curious. But assuming not, let's talk about some of the other elements that I think are more worthy of your time for consideration. So in the proposal, I've listed each of these along with a price. And one of the way that I've outlined each one is I provide the name of the element, the cost proposal, what's included in it, and then what that budget may or may not be dependent upon. And I think that's important because you guys have so many things going on. We've got the municipal self-assessment as part of plan endorsement, and you've got the opportunity zone charrettes, which are most meaningful when we get to the public participation part. And then also the 21st Century Redevelopment Program grant, which has not been received. I'm not sure if it's been applied for yet, given everything that's going on. Yeah, I'm not surprised to see Betsy shaking her head.
Yeah, in fact, as I just looked back at the date of when you sent that over and thinking, oh, how quaint it all was back on March 5th.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for each of these elements, I know whether or not, whether there'll be coordination with any of those other documents and whether the budget is going to be dependent upon it. The answer is yes or no, depending on it. But ultimately, the municipal self-assessment is something that is going to be relevant to every master plan element, but not so much for the budget for all of them. So let's just go through each one. The goals and objectives is listed as the first one. I think that is something that, A, the borough is required to do, but two, I think it's critically important. It's those goals and objectives that are really going to set the path forward for everything else we do in the master plan. And quite frankly, it's one of the lower budgeted items in here, if I'm honest. So I think that's something that the borough should certainly move forward with. Next, we have the land use plan. As I said before, it's one of your required master plan elements. So if there's a desire to do a comprehensive master plan, which is really something that addresses all or the primary topics addressing planning in a municipality, the land use element must be included. I will say that the borough can, I just want to be clear about one thing. While there are certain master plan elements that are required, that means you must have a current one that's either current or it's been re-examined recently, for which you guys have. But there's nothing to stop you from deciding to do any of these other elements on their own. For example, you could do just a circulation element, notwithstanding the concerns about the lack of traffic, but you could do just a circulation element, just a land use element, just a historic element, and so forth. But if you want to do a comprehensive element, again, we've got to do the goals and objectives and the land use plan. You already have a housing plan. So I've given those first two required elements, the goals and objectives and the land use plan first. The goals and objectives at 1,500. The land use plan is set at 15,000. I do think that this is going to be informed, as well as the budget is dependent upon the opportunity zone charrettes, because that is going to handle some of the public participation. It's also going to have the same for the municipal self-assessment, as well as the 21st Century Redevelopment Program grant. All four of these documents are going to work hand in hand together, and they're going to be coordinated in terms of the information and the research done for each, and then the public participation. So beyond the goals and objectives and the land use, I then go through each of the optional master plan elements. And so I do list the circulation element, although I recognize and recommend that Jay be the one that primarily does this element. I have thrown a small budget in the proposal just so that you guys are not surprised by the cost of coordination and just generally the coordination that Jay and I will have to do. I also have a utility service plan elements. This is something that will address all of the utilities in the borough that have to do with land use. So not things like telephone, for example, but it addresses drainage, flood, sewer, water, solid waste, and stormwater management. This is an element that I think is going to become more important as the borough develops and redevelops over the coming years. I do also think that folks should be on the lookout if you do decide to do the utility element, that is something that I will need to coordinate heavily with your borough engineer and planning board engineer, Bob Clerico. So I would expect that there may be some budget from those guys, just because they're gonna need to spend time talking to me and reviewing what's written for those items. We also next have the community facilities element. This is an element that addresses the size and location of municipal facilities, generally excluding parks, because there's another element that I list later for that. It also excludes municipal operations. So, for example, it might talk about the need for a larger municipal building, but don't look to this element for a detailed operations analysis to determine how much space the municipal park has, for example. But we can help identify new locations or expanded operations that are necessary on a more physical sense. I also have the recreation element, and this actually addresses all of the borough's parks and open spaces. So this will identify where the existing parks are, what the facilities are they adequate? Are there new facilities that should be included? So, for example, soccer fields as opposed to baseball, that type of thing. But it will also identify the need for additional locations, and it may identify specific lots if that's known, or simply set forth the need and perhaps criteria for open space. It can also be used to justify public purchase or otherwise acquiring public lands for the purpose of parks and recreation. Next, we have an economic development element, and this addresses the match or perhaps mismatch of existing and potential future jobs to the workforce in the municipality and the surrounding region. It can also be used to talk about industry trends and what's appropriate or maybe not appropriate, but perhaps marketable in a municipality. So, for example, is there too much retail space? Is there too much office space? What uses are more heavily in demand in the region, and can they be accommodated in the borough through perhaps changes to land use, changes to zoning? This is an element that I think is really useful to towns like Flemington that are looking to have a commercial district, or for you guys, really your downtown district, be upgraded and thrive a bit more than it already does. It's also one that I would say it should most certainly be coordinated with the FCP and having those guys involved and to ensure that we're on the same page. I would really hate for you guys to have an economic development element that's been adopted and disagreed with by the primary organization advancing economic development in the borough, to the extent possible. Next, I've got the historic preservation plan element. I think this can be useful to you guys because you're going through an evolution with historic preservation right now. We've got the HPC map that they're seeking to amend. We've got with changes they're proceeding with now that addresses the existing historic district with the desire to change the boundaries. There are also there's evolution as they look to become a certified local government. There have been HPC ordinance changes that we've discussed in the past. I think this is an element that really could be worthwhile and really help bring together all of these changes to historic preservation policy that have been discussed over the last year or so. Next, we have a recycling plan element, and this addresses provisions for collection and disposing of recyclable materials. It talks about how they will be collected in terms of physically on a property when we think about dumpster space. It can also be helpful if the municipality is having challenges with its collection of recyclables, and also what it does with them after they've left the borough. So this is an element that could be used to help explore that issue a bit. Although, again, I want to caution, similar to the community facilities element, this is really not intended to be an operations manual of sorts, but it can be useful to ensure that recycling operates smoothly and it will continue to do so, particularly from a physical aspect in the town. It is, I will say, it's not a particularly popular element, just because there's less of a relationship to the actions of a planning board and a zoning board for this element as compared to others. Not that it's not applicable, but if you think about the recycling element compared to the historic preservation element, a lot of times the historic preservation element wins out in terms of the limited budget resources. And sort of similar is actually the next element, the educational facilities element. This is one that explores long-range planning of local public schools. Again, it is not an operations element. It is not addressing school operations, but it simply would require coordination with the school district, the leaders of each individual school as well, to determine, are their facilities adequate, yes or no, and is there space within that property, or is additional land within the borough necessary in order to accommodate their anticipated growth? It is, as I said, it's a less popular element in part. It's because the municipality has little jurisdiction over a school district. I mean, certainly as compared to other private entities, or to private entities. But still, some municipalities that are experiencing growing pains with their schools find this very much worthwhile. The last two elements are somewhat related. The first one is the conservation element, and this addresses all of the natural conditions in the municipality, whether we're talking about open space, farmland if applicable, but also water resources in terms of streams that might traverse the municipality and so forth. It is one that really identifies the existing conditions from an environmental perspective and what policies are necessary to preserve or enhance those existing conditions. And then last but not least, we have the Green Buildings and Environmental Sustainability Plan element, commonly referred to as the sustainability element. We actually did this in 2011, and so I would imagine that the element would be updated and would have a similar format, in the sense that it's going to identify all the policies that the borough can incorporate into land use, redevelopment, other borough ordinances, to essentially limit or reduce the environmental footprint. It's the element that's most on point for trying to address the impacts of climate change as well, if you want to think about it like that. It can, but does not need to coordinate with the conservation element. These two elements, they go together nicely, but I don't think they're necessary to be done together. So that's a rundown of all the elements that are available choices to you guys. I also went through for the second half of the proposal and addressed public participation and meetings that I think are necessary, or at least desired, to get these items done. So if you'd like, I can go through that, or if you want me to take a breath, and if anybody has questions about the elements themselves.
But why don't you take a breath before we go into the other ones? Because I'm sure there's lots of questions and comments from the board on at least the first portion of your proposal.
Sure.
Anybody?
Yes.
What do we got?
I have obviously lots to say.
Oh, Susan.
You want,
I have
I don't
lots.
want to, you know, I never have any comments about master plan stuff. So if anybody wants to go first, I'm certainly willing.
Yeah, I was making some notes, and Beth, does this kind of does your proposal more or less supersede Kendra's regarding the center designation, or are they separate?
No.
Or they work together?
Yeah, they work together, and no, they specifically work together. Kendra and I talked about the scope of her proposal to make sure that I'm not overlapping. I would expect that a lot of the data that she collects is going to get fed into this master plan, and that's why, for example, for some of these elements where it says the budget is dependent upon it, everything will be coordinated with those other planning tasks, but for some of these elements, the budget is actually dependent.
Yeah, no, because you have like the public participation stuff at one price, and she has another in there at like 17.5, and all of that loops back to the opportunity zone grant and the charrettes, which brings me.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the public participation and how those meetings for the opportunity zone versus the master plan will work together in the second part.
Okay. So the bad news, we didn't know when those charrettes are going to happen. And we're talking with, the FCP is talking with the EDA, who have their hands full right now, too, trying to keep businesses afloat. Obviously, we can't be doing any public participation, any charrettes, and there's no way to predict when we will have that opportunity to do that again. So, because our opportunity zone grant is dependent upon those charrettes, that's what it was written around. All of that stuff, unfortunately, we don't know when that will happen at all or what that planning is. That said, all of this stuff also needs to be done in conjunction and planning with the FCP, because they are one of the main partners on this, on that grant fund. So I can't go in and say, okay, we're going to pay for this out of that grant, because I can't unilaterally do that. It requires the FCP's participation, so that should be planned on them being having a seat at the table as all of this master plan stuff planned out. The other thing, I have some notes here. Let me go back here. Beth, do you happen to know, and I know you mentioned like 21st century grants, and I was shaking my head vigorously no. Even if we didn't have this, I'm not in a position, I don't have the capacity to be doing any grant writing right now.
Yeah.
We did, by resolution, hire a grant writer, a freelance grant writer last night at council, mostly to tap into some of the USDA and CDBG funding opportunities that are out there. And I'm curious if you know if USDA funding, rural community fundings can be used for any of this, any master plan planning.
I don't know. I've not heard of somebody using that pot of money for this.
Okay.
But that doesn't necessarily mean it's not available.
Yeah, I mean, certainly with the public facilities, it could be, because that's some of what the CDBG stuff and the USDA stuff can fund.
It's a good idea, Betsy.
Yeah, thank you. Some of my other questions were with Kendra's whether or not utility service plan, and I know Mr. Clerico sent out the stormwater management. That's going to be coming up, and whether that's in the master plan or not, that has to be prioritizing. We do have an attorney who works with our sewer utility, Diane Alexander, who pretty much has written the book on stormwater utility creations in New Jersey, as well as the stormwater management stuff. So we'll be working with her on that, because we also have some other issues that we have to look at. We have this pending ACO, which Mr. Clerico is probably familiar with. That's still being worked out, and it all ties in together as well. And it's going to be a huge issue coming up. The ACO, we got that wet weather facility too, and a Category 1 stream designation, so that all kind of ties in. But also on the utility service plan, can that include LED lighting as well as broadband connectivity? I would love to see us looking at whether or not it's feasible, or if it could even, feasible or not feasible, or long-term, short-term, some kind of municipal broadband utility as well that I'd love to see included in that.
So the definition of a utility service element for the municipal land use law does not include broadband. I will say that the definition was written before broadband had been invented, I believe. So I would be, Karen, speak up if you disagree, but if you guys did a utility service element, as long as it addressed some or all of the required components, I would be comfortable throwing that in there to address it. I am not, it's a little, so that's certainly something that we can put in there. In terms of LED lighting, like replacement of street lights, that if we were already doing utility service element, I would sort of say the same thing. Let's just stick it in there since it goes with the other topics. But I think that can also be addressed in a sustainability plan element. And then if there's no sustainability plan element and we were going to try to find a way to address environmental issues in, say, a conservation element or a land use plan, ultimately we would find a place to put that in there. I don't see it as being a major feature, but it could be tucked into a couple different elements.
I agree with you, Beth. And again, these are recommendations, so wherever we can fit them in and put them to the forefront as things that people should be considering when they're doing their design and when the borough is reviewing these proposals, I think that makes sense. I'm all right with that.
Yeah. Okay. So the other thing too, because the master plan and getting back to the current public health emergency and looping back to like with the charrettes, and hopefully this doesn't diverge. Hopefully I'm not going off on a tangent here. If I am, just stop me. I won't take offense. Regarding, and I don't think we've had a meeting since before the New Jersey Futures Conference. I did have a conversation with planning advocacy at the New Jersey Futures Conference on February 28th, I believe it was, regarding meeting the June deadline for the center designation renewal. They indicated to me at the time that as long as we're in the process of working towards it, it shouldn't be a problem to extend that deadline. That was, of course, before everything shut down as well, so I'm not even sure at this point whether or not they'll kick out that deadline for another year like they did a year ago. Or what. I should probably make that call, or maybe Beth, or Beth, if you have any contacts at planning advocacy, I could also give Bruce Harris a call. He was up in Chatham. He might know. So I'm just, the deadlines are all kind of real nebulous to me. With that in mind, too, as we have this discussion, and I didn't want to stop it ahead of time. In all honesty, I don't know whether or not any of this stuff is going to actually even happen this year, because I don't know what our financial picture is going to look like in another quarter with the borough. So, and whether or not, this can be funded through an emergency appropriation, but we're funding a whole lot of other stuff right now through emergency appropriations too. So I just want, everybody keep that in the back of their mind.
Sure.
I didn't want to stop it because it's an important conversation, and maybe in 3 months from now we'll be all great and we'll have lots of FEMA money and CDBG money and USDA money, but I don't know where we'll be.
I think that's completely understandable, Betsy, and I think as long as we're moving forward, bit by bit, we all know, that we did our update in 2015, and we can always do, although it is our goal to do a full comprehensive master plan, we all are under the gun when it comes to economics right now in this just amazingly unusual situation. And if we need to do this piecemeal, little by little, we do it piecemeal, little by little. It's okay. We'll get it done. But having these conversations, our goals is just as important, frankly.
Oh, no.
So I
Absolutely.
completely appreciate that, and I completely understand, and I feel horrible that everybody is in this situation, and I am not envious of you having to try to juggle this budget. That being said, I do want to talk to, I had reviewed the proposal, and if Todd doesn't mind, I'd like to ask Beth a few questions, kind of like the shakedown section of the planning board meeting at this point, and ask her a few questions about the money part of her proposal, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. Let me just switch over to the proposal itself. Hold on. Got it in front of me here. So pretty much, Beth, everything that you said, we've been through this before, but for the benefit of those planning board members and the public who may watch this later on, the proposal is very similar to ones we've seen from planners that have served the borough in the past. And I think that even though, like you said, it's a low dollar amount, the goals and objectives are probably the most important part of this proposal, because it's the thing that every developer, every potential buyer of property in town, besides residential, as well as reporters and read first. So it really is probably our most important part. And I think I just want to go through again, even though we may be pushed back on timeline, the optional plan, master plan elements. I think if I recall in years past, and Beth, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure I've asked this in years past when it came to proposals such as this. There are some of these elements that we could save money on by writing ourselves if we break it up individually. I'm thinking specifically, for me, it's really easy. I've written, as you may or may not know, probably 40 long-range facility plans for different public school districts in New Jersey. I can write an educational facilities element just by reading our local 2 school districts, LRFP. So I'm willing to volunteer to actually write that. And I'm sure that some of these other things, like you mentioned the recycling and things like that, I think in the past, can you confirm, Beth, we did actually do some of this writing ourselves and then just pay you to coordinate some of those items for a lower price. So to be honest with you, I think we can have a comprehensive plan and even get some of these optional elements in there as well if we put our talents to the grindstone and do some of this work ourselves. Do I recall that right, that we did that in the past?
I suspect that you guys did that as part of the 2010 master plan. I don't recall there being writing done as part of the 2015 reexamination report, although I will say the borough did a ton of work on coordination aspects and the public participation. That was huge. That's a little different. I think you may have done that for the 2010 master plan. I will also say I did that with another municipality where they wrote a lot of different portions of the plan, and I thought that worked pretty well. There were some pitfalls that I think that need to be avoided, and that, quite frankly, I think would be easily avoided here in Flemington. But especially for some of these optional master plan elements, if folks feel like they have the time, maybe we all have the time right now to start to review and read and do some writing, I am more than happy to help coordinate to bring down, so that you guys get more bang for your buck, essentially. Bring down the price while still giving you guys some information on topics that might not have otherwise been able to be included.
Yeah. Maybe it wasn't you that I shook down, maybe it was Carl, but either way, and I do appreciate you working with us. I think the other comment I just want to make to the group, and I don't know if everybody had the opportunity to read in detail Beth's proposal, but it really is very well written and very detailed, so I encourage you to do so. The only other comment I had regarding the proposal was specifically the economic development plan. I know it's listed as optional, but honestly, I think next to the goals and objectives, that particular item I think is probably the most important part of of the entire plan. And specifically, I'll just kind of give you some history. 20 years ago, I was a planning student at Rutgers, and I was told to go sit in at my local planning board. And I did. I had no idea who these people were, and there was some chairwoman named Erica that I, watched in public and run this planning board meeting. And back then, I had to read my local residential, as a resident, because I had a house here at the time, obviously, read my local master plan. And our local master plan 20 years ago talked in detail about the lack of office square footage in town and the lack of availability for office, the need for office square footage. And so it's very ironic that, that I remember that need then. And of course, 10 years later, we are talking about the development of, online shopping and Amazon and how it's taking over retail. And we're concerned about, how much retail square footage we have in town and how we need to kind of move our master plan to address that issue. And now, of course, 10 years later, we're dealing with just a whole nother situation. So I think of all the optional items that she has listed here, I really want us to make a point to focus on that. And she's absolutely right. We need to involve the FCP as well. That particular element, just 10 years and 10 years and 10 years, looks different dramatically every time, and will again. And COVID will also probably influence that section as well. But that particular item in particular, I just want to stress that everybody take a time to read it, please.
And let me say something before, while we're talking about the economic development element. So, I do, you and I seem to be on the same page. I really just want to stress again the need for FCP to be involved. And also, one other document that may be better coming from the FCP, or maybe they're interested in helping produce, that can be appended to an economic development that can be very helpful to a town is some municipalities have actually engaged a consultant to do a market study. Because that is, I'm more than capable of, pulling trends and data from certain sources and talking about who works in the town, who works in the county, and so forth, and what the labor pool is. But I'm going to be pulling census data and things like that. But there are experts that understand market trends and can just dive deeper than what a planner should be asked to do, quite frankly. And that can be very useful because it can really help identify specific trends. And then in the post-COVID world, before all this happened, there were huge shifts in industries for restaurants, for retail, and for office space. Post this public health crisis, there may be additional shifts. So if folks are inclined to include this element, I just want to throw that out there. Maybe there's some coordination with the FCP about bringing on a market consultant to help evaluate trends and to produce a supplementary document. It should be something that the FCP is interested in, and it might be something that they're already working with or already have folks engaged in.
Let me just interject in there. Remember, I kind of mentioned like USDA funding and CDBG funding and FEMA stuff. I'll have to talk with our OEM and probably Bill Hance and some others, and Beth, you could even maybe poke around on this because this could be potential business for you in other towns. I suspect that given the current situation, the current public health crisis, and as you mentioned, how it's going to change the retail landscape, I could certainly see that being an expense that we would be able to get reimbursement for, because on our main street, because we have to be able to recover from this, and knowing what the market trends will be post COVID-19 will help us to an economic recovery.
Yep. Okay.
So just maybe pull that out as one thing, and figure out who could maybe do it, who the experts are out there who can do that.
I have some ideas, and maybe I'll reach out to those guys to see if maybe they've actually heard or know about money that's available for this type of thing specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I think that could definitely be something that we'll be able to get some reimbursement on. So we could prioritize that and pull it out and then adapt it by the master plan stuff.
Sure. Okay.
Okay, that's it. That's why I was like furiously raising my hand, because and that's what we've been doing with a lot of stuff. And I'm trying to get a lot of stuff in right now that if there's a possibility of getting reimbursement, the grant writer, for instance, that we hired last night at council, because we are hiring her to help us recover from the COVID-19 public health emergency, we expect that we'll be able to get that money back from FEMA.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Yeah.
Susan, were there other comments?
Well, I think you know, as the kind of the master plan chair on this board, I didn't have anything else except the comments that you know, that my only charge last time was to ask Beth to do the proposal. Now that we have the proposal, but we're in this kind of state of flux, I think I kind of would look to the rest of the board to say, what should I, as a master plan coordinator, you know, on this board do next? But perhaps Betsy just answered my question, and maybe I can help somehow. Number one, coordinate, reach out to Robin, coordinate with the FCP on Beth's behalf, because it sounds like that's something that needs to be done. But also, perhaps I can, you know, help with some of the grant applications to get some of this money to incorporate that into our master plan. But I don't know what I should do from here, to be honest with you. So I'm kind of looking for feedback.
Well, I think
what needs to be done next.
I think you answered your own question there on some of the just stacking the importance of some of the pieces, especially like goals and objectives, for example, and things that do not require a terrible amount of expenditure, and the coordination with the FCP, sort of getting all of our ducks in a row first, you know, and then seeing where the chips fall.
Right.
You know, and again, I think, you know, we all just got this, and I think people are looking through it to see, you know, what are the different plans, and I thank you for volunteering to write some. At this point, I'm not sure anybody else on the board would be prepared to do so. I only caution, like when I tried to rewrite the signage ordinance, which I have done on the other side of the fence, we ended up having to have it all rewritten by professionals due to some.
The LRFP portion is the only one I would feel very comfortable with, and I believe I even might have written something the last time around. So I feel comfortable writing that very limited amount. But I think for me, what I will ask the board to do is, if you have any other comments on Beth's proposal, send them over to me. And then for the next meeting, I think I'm just going to put together kind of a to-do list. What do we do next?
Right.
Being that we're in a state of flux, because I think normally I would say, okay, we're ready to go with public input and meetings and stuff. But because we can't do that, I think I need to kind of refocus and say, okay, what can we do and what can we get done with? And I'll put together a to-do list within COVID, 19 parameters of what we can do on the master plan, and feel like we're still accomplishing something and moving forward.
Thank you. I was going to suggest too, on page 5, when we talk about public participation, I think one of the things that this new world order has taught us is the ability to use technology to our advantage. And I'm really interested in what a survey could do, Beth, and having input that would be a starting point to be able to say, I can't tell you how many surveys I have participated in just from a retail relaunch perspective of my own peers and industry. That everybody's seeking input. Everybody's seeking, what do we do next, and who talks to whom. So Susan, if you could add that as my piece on, perhaps it is a way to get it off the ground, a comprehensive survey of sorts.
Okay.
You know,
I know that Beth had recommended like a, what is it, Survey Monkey type of thing. So maybe, that's something we can do electronically and get some feedback. And frankly, that might focus the in-person opportunity.
Susan?
Susan, you just froze. Susan? Houston, we have a problem.
I'm going to jump in while her internet catches up with her. Thank you, Susan, for bringing up, kind of the to-do list, the timeline, setting it down. Is what we need to accomplish this month, next month, the following months, based upon the current situation that we have. I want to also jump in a little bit.
I'll put together a to-do list for us the next week.
Great. On the recycling bit, because our contract is due up next July, and we've been in conversation with the Public Works Committee as to how to fix that, not just recycling, but also the whole garbage situation right now, and that's a big bill that unfortunately is going to be coming home to roost for all taxpayers across the state, and particularly here in the borough next year. So anything we can do on that, and I'm going to Mike Campion is our recycling coordinator in the borough, and I'm not volunteering him, but he's got a lot of historical knowledge on recycling in this borough. Also regarding the public thing rather than Survey Monkey, one of the things I suggested previously, because it will be public, and if we could find out, much like, how like the census just did, everybody got a postcard, it's got a number on there. Every door direct mail, however we want to do it to everybody in the borough, that'll get stakeholders, and then we can also pull out property owners, so it can be, however we want to mesh that. I just don't want, Barbara or Karen from up on Musconetnog Road telling, expressing her overwhelming concern for the borough that, we should preserve the buildings that are halfway falling down already. So any kind of survey, we have to make sure we keep the purity of the results in place, please.
Yeah, I think that now would be the perfect. We'll see how the next month or so goes. But I think now is the perfect time because people are more apt to participate in things like that. Not saying that everybody has more time in their hands. Many are even much busier than normal. But yeah, absolutely. I saw it as something like somewhat of a closed survey, meaning you fill it out once and that's your shot. And then you could regulate it. And Beth, I think we talked about it last time, where you have borough residents, stakeholders, Raritan Township, if we wanted to from a neighboring municipality perspective. And then you really could have an aggregated response that was based on X amount of participation, not just those that have the wherewithal and the time to come to public meetings, of which I don't think we'll have a lot of folks that will have the time. There will be some folks that will have the time to come out at 7 o'clock in a few months, but many people will be putting their lives back together and expecting us to step up based on their input. So yeah, Beth, I'd love to participate in that with you, just to talk about how that could happen. Okay.
Okay, that's fine. And also, I'm going to throw out there, Joe Getz with JGC, and I know, Beth, you're familiar with him. You probably know him quite well. Is really good at those kind of community survey things, and pulling that out. And also, Gensler has done a lot of work. Gensler's trying to get a foothold to do some stuff in the borough with Liberty Village as well. So, and again, I had a beautiful, went through, and Dave Norton was there, a beautiful presentation, exciting, great. And at the end of it, and they said, so when do you want to sign up? And I said, oh, you want us to pay for that? I can't be spending any money right now.
Oh, that's great.
But it's Liberty Village, so it would be focused to just that. But I just throw that out, Beth, not to take away work from you, but to also just recognize that it may be easier also if some of that stuff gets farmed out. Mostly also, Beth, because you've been working in the borough for so long and you have such an intimate knowledge of it, that sometimes that outside group coming in, looking at it fresh and looking at it as a blank slate, particularly with that assessment kind of stuff, for that survey stuff, could be really, really useful as well.
Sure.
Guys are always good.
Yeah, that's it. But again, I don't want to take away from you. You've worked very hard at that, and I'm not saying you're not qualified or capable of doing it. I'm just throwing it out.
No, it's fine. I understand what you're saying, and I'm happy to coordinate with anybody. It's all good.
Okay. Well, that was a great discussion, guys. And I think if I could, Kara, help me out on our other subcommittees. I am responsible for the sign review committee. I don't have anything to report. And Susan, did you have anything to report on the HPC?
I really don't. I did reach out to Don, but as Richard mentioned, he's swamped right now. So I'll just say to Brian, since he's here, that once I get through to Don, Brian and Don and I'll have a conference call, and then we'll have an update for you next time.
Great.
Yeah, Todd, I've got master plan, parking, ordinances, opportunity zone, census, and redevelopment as the subcommittees.
Oh, the census will be done and momentarily, right, at the end of April. So I think that can be, Karen, you're smiling. I think you were our census.
Yeah, I'm only smiling because really it's not possible for anything that we were thinking of originally to have happened. I think it's just got to happen virtually right now, isn't it? It's just happening with people filling it in online, and that's the way it is. So I think all of those possibilities for input were taken away from us to increase input.
But let me ask you something. I know, it's interesting. I think a lot of those census commercials people are seeing on TV because of COVID. Everybody's glued to their respective cable news networks. And you do see it on every network on the census. But I'm just trying to think from a municipality perspective, is there anything that we could do just to get the word out that's, I don't know, I'm trying to think, a banner across Main Street. I have no idea.
If you're holding on to one end of it because the banner poles are gone.
Well, I will do one hand, and Jeremy, if you can do the other side.
We'll put it across Pennsylvania, Todd.
And I mean, I wasn't sure if there was anything else. I mean, I know everything comes at a cost. Whether or not there could be a postcard, or I'm just not sure everybody understands that the fact that even though the commercial I saw with Cardi B said, regardless of your immigration status and so on and so forth. I don't know. I'm open for suggestions because we're running out of time in this.
There was an email that went out today.
We really are.
Census has moved that deadline back into June. So.
Oh, okay.
Today.
So maybe, Todd, to your point, we could put something on the borough website about, make a note of that. As regards specific other things, I mean, the committee or nothing really happened because once we started to get involved, everything fell apart. So I haven't heard anything through United Way of anything, because I know they were the outreach, and I don't know if Jeremy or Susan had any input from them, but we didn't really have any further discussions on what was necessary to be done. So certainly there's options, there's opportunities, Todd, for us to just try and get the word out a little bit, but I don't know in terms of any coordinated planning what we can.
I know I felt compelled to post it on Facebook. I think I saw Jeff Doshner posted something on Facebook. I tried, and again, just trying to get the word out to have people fill it out. So
true.
The bottom line is that our municipality was the least responsive of the entire county 10 years ago. in our borough, and we need to change that. And unfortunately, you know, Karen's right, and I unless somebody reached out to Brian, no, we took the time to go to that meeting. They have all of our numbers, and nobody has reached out to us. So, you know, I think it's probably because there's not much we can do besides try to engage with some of our local contacts and encourage everybody to do so.
Hey,
so I guess we can do that here too, and encourage everybody that watches this recording to do so as well.
Beth, up for the borough texts, you know that it'll say like you know, no garbage pickup.
911.
Is it Swift 911, right? Is there a requirement? I mean, I don't 911 system.
Most people have access, and I know that some people still have issues. Yeah. It was confusing. I don't think the superintendent maybe understood what the impact and what the necessity to go to that meeting was. Maybe there was some misunderstanding there, but I'm just wondering if there's a chance to do something. Being, you know, a lot of them have made sure that they have access in order to be able to do schoolwork. Is there something in that part of the aspect of it that we can maybe make sure we reach all the students in the, you know, the families with students in the school system in some way?
I wonder. That's a great idea.
But I don't know whether we are allowed to do that or not. No, maybe just this Swift 911 will help.
I know that there is Jess Hand is on that school committee.
Right.
So we could
the council liaison.
Go to her, right? And I guess that would be the place to go as far as getting in touch with the school districts and hopefully that they can then pass on this information. Like, hey, remind your parents while you're home.
Like a
community engagement. Ask Jess to do that. Reach out.
Yeah, Betsy, Betsy was trying to say something. I think she kept getting cut off.
I'm actually wondering if I would suspect that the low response is probably from the immigrant community and folks who are in poverty. And, you know, they're still doing school lunches, and this might be something that Bonnie would be really good to reach out to the school superintendent, to reach out to Carrie and ask, hey, can they put a postcard in each lunch that gets picked up, each of the school lunches picked up? You know, don't forget to tell your parents to.
Was there free? Was there any collateral that the census, like in other words, a postcard, for example, that says "Don't forget the census" would be good for any municipality? Like, is there any collateral that was offered or talked about?
Grant money. I know early on when, you know, before COVID, pre-COVID, when she was at the council meeting, the lady from the census talking about the county got money. The county got money from the census to do outreach. I don't know what kind of outreach they're doing.
But like Susan said, we've had no contact from them since we went to that meeting at the United Way. in terms of anything we need to do, or, you know, making sure that we're doing anything. Susan was exactly right there.
No, I haven't heard anything either.
Mm.
Well, maybe one
I
of
recall
us.
one challenge.
Hey,
I recall one challenge that was brought up was since the 2020 census was all online this time, there was no mailers. It was identifying a place where people without internet access or convenient internet access could go, and we'd identified the library on Main Street as really the public computer center, but that's been closed for the past at least month now, and is closed indefinitely. So if we are going to do any type of, I guess, reminder, like we talked about a text message blast, do we have any community internet access points at the right now that people can use?
Right. But Brian, that was why my thought was coming with if the kids are having, some of the kids in the low income communities have had to set up access in order to do their schoolwork, that maybe we have more outreach in that respect than we did previously. I don't know if there's.
So Comcast made all of their hotspots around town open. They also installed a lot of free internet for low-income people, free for like 90 days, I think. So the school was looking into getting jetpacks from Verizon for those who did not get internet installed for whatever reason. Now, I'm happy to bring it up tomorrow, since I know the county did get money. Tomorrow is the county call for mayors with the freeholders. I'm happy to drop that and ask, hey, what are y'all doing about the census?
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, that would be useful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I also think that, you know, Bonnie Duncan was, you know, the complete count committee leader on this. It's totally reasonable for somebody who was on the planning board committee that they asked us to create, to call up Bonnie or call up the lady who's in charge of the census. Her name's slipping my mind right now, and say, yo, what up? We haven't heard from you. How are we accommodating this situation? You know, especially for Flemington, which really needs to be counted.
Right.
So is that so?
If you don't, I'm sorry, Todd. Go ahead.
So it sounds to me like we had a couple of suggestions. One was for Jeremy to reach out to Jessica because she is the school liaison, just to, you know, it doesn't hurt to mention it, right? Betsy to mention it at her county meeting tomorrow of the mayors or whatever meeting you have tomorrow, and then who can reach out to Bonnie Duncan, either Karen or Brian, anybody, as well as Eileen. Can you just recirculate our contact? I forget the woman's name as well from the fall when she came in and presented to us in November.
I could find it too. I have my notes from that meeting. I'll take a look and I can email it over to Eileen.
And then
thank you. And I also Todd, I agreed that I would contact Caitlin about getting something possibly on the Swift 911 system. Yeah.
So Brian, maybe that gives you the contact for either Bonnie Duncan and or the census, so everybody on the committee has some reach out. Can you do that?
Yep.
Okay. Brian gave us a yep. All right, guys, if we can move on then. That covers all of our subcommittees, right?
Yeah.
So item number 7, chair comments. Other than the fact that I think we did really good tonight. Other than I did want to state for the record, we did, Edna dropped off at 8:01. I think I saw her drop off. So for the record, she was on via telephone. Eileen, if I could ask you in the future, make sure that you're watching folks come in and out, just so we can capture that, because it's not something.
I get an alert, like a ding on my computer.
Okay.
So that I can see who's dropped off and not.
And certainly a strange time, but we will get through it as a team. And our next meeting is April 28th. At the locations that you're currently sitting in, I believe. And is there anybody who can't make it on April 28th? Perhaps you have travel plans or no? Kidding aside,
going on a cruise.
Right?
Going on a cruise.
Kidding aside, if there's anybody who can't make it, make sure you reach out to Eileen, just so we know that we don't have any quorum issues. And that's it. I believe when we go to the bills now, you all did receive a PDF copy of the bills. They were essentially for Kyle McManus as well as the Hunterdon County Democrat. And if somebody is willing to make a motion to audit the bill.
For Kara Kaczynski too as well.
Oh, there were?
There should be 3.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Mine was stuck.
one.
Mine was
Yeah.
stuck. Yes, there are 3. There are.
Thanks a lot, Todd.
I'm sorry, Kara.
All right, Todd,
Just so
I'll
that
so
you
move
know,
for paying the bills.
Second.
I'll second.
We audit the bills.
Eileen, did you get that?
I
Audit the
have
bills. sorry.
Karen and Susan as the second.
Okay. Sorry, Brian.
Sorry,
Good
Brian. It kind of just
Good
flashed
enough.
up. I have it on whoever's talking.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Driver,
Yes.
Mr. Long, Mr. Campion,
Yes.
Mr. Cook,
Yes.
Mrs. Engelhardt,
Yes.
Mr. Budney,
Yes.
Mr. Hain. I have
Yes.
trouble with. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Ms. Giffen,
Yes.
and we have a full board tonight, so I'm not gonna ask Mr. Hill or Mr. Norton.
From a procedural question, Kara, I typically sign these. I did print out copies. Can I sign them and drop them at, how do I get these processed?
Yeah, you can you can drop them off at the Borough Hall, and Bill Hance will have them, and Jeremy can also sign them under his.
So I'll take my copy that I printed, I'll sign my section and put them where at Borough Hall?
There's a Dropbox, or you can arrange. You have to sign some plans also, Todd.
I know, I was just gonna say that there's a set of
So-
plans I need to sign.
So you
Bob and
can either coordinate with Sally or somebody at the office that's there every day, or well, you have a key to the.
Is the office open every day?
Well, it's
Betsy?
closed.
No. The door is locked. Sally is there generally. Somebody is there generally Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 10:30 to like 3 o'clock or so. But I think you can scan. I think you can scan the signature.
I know, but I have plans too, so if I have to do both, I'll coordinate with Sally, and then Jeremy, I'll drop this pack off there as well. And I'll text you or email you when after I've done it, so you can go down there yourself. Okay.
Okay.
And just
If it cause any sort of snafus or anything, just let me know. I mean, Betsy's right. I mean, we could do electronic signatures at these times right now. And then if for the borough's files, you need wet signatures later, we could certainly do that. But to the extent you can coordinate and have to go down there anyway, that's fine too.
Yeah, I might be able to run down at lunchtime tomorrow. I'll coordinate with Sally. I'll email her. Okay. All right. Do we have any professional reports? Let's start with Kara.
I don't have anything new from a litigation standpoint. Still at an impasse and have some discrepancy with regard to agreements on witnesses and exhibits. The court has to intervene and tell us what our next steps are. And of course, they are working on other issues right now. But I'm hoping maybe by the next meeting, we'll have some direction and we'll be able to go from there. But as of right now, I don't have anything new.
Okay. How about Bob?
Just that memo I sent out on the state with the regulations, and we discussed that earlier. The only other thing, has been some communication with Chamois Shine regarding them refiling and what variances they might be associated with that. Beth and I have been talking with them, so that's it.
Okay. Okay, yeah, just keep us posted on both applications. This is sort of our trial run. I can't imagine when we're doing this and there's witnesses and applicants and people are sharing screens, but I think it'll be sort of fun.
Just let me update really quick to go into that. Obviously we've had these DCA guidelines that have come down, and everyone is trying to see how to best implement them in their own way. I have some private clients that I'm going to be doing actual public hearing on applications for. So from that, I'm going to take what I can learn and what works and what doesn't, bring it back to the board so that we can see exactly how best to do this. I think the most difficult things are, not only having things on the screen to be able to look at, but also the timing of everything, because not only are documentation that we would normally have to be on file with the borough 10 days before a hearing, but now all of the exhibits that they plan on using at the hearing are going to have to be identified and on file to be posted on the website and available typically at the police station or wherever we designate 2 days before the hearing. So that's something new. So again, these are things we'll be able to cross that bridge when we come to it. When all of this happened, we sent out extension letters to all of the applicants requesting that they grant extensions through the end of June, basically meaning that the borough would be able to conduct whatever business it could to the extent it wanted to. However, it was not necessary to do anything until the end of June because we got this free extension that the applicant agreed to in light of what was going on. So even if we do nothing, we're okay through the end of June. But I think that we should see what comes in, and I'm not doing Shammy. You're going to have Bill Gianos handling that one, but to the extent that they do come in with something, and you guys want to have a hearing on that, we'll certainly be able to coordinate it and do what needs to be done.
Okay. Thank you. How about
Tara? I had something to add to that, Todd. Today, my husband's firm sent out an email that was basically an interpretation of the DCA rules for public hearings, virtual public hearings. And I will copy that to you, Tara, just so you have just another peer of yours interpretation. I won't transfer that to everyone because it's not coming from you as advice, but I will send that to you, Kara. So if there's anything you want to look at some of your other colleagues in the state's interpretation of the DCA virtual meeting rules, you can see it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. And Beth, did you have anything from a report?
No, all of the concerns or things I thought I might bring up have been addressed as part of the master plan or the COVID public discussion topics.
Okay. And Jay?
Nothing for me, Todd. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Item number 10 on the agenda, executive session as needed. It is not needed. So we move to item number 11, which is adjournment. All in favor of adjournment?
God, wait, I have something.
Oh. Okay,
Has everyone filled out their financial disclosure forms that Sally sent around?
Yes.
No. I'm just reminding you of those.
Yes, please look at your email. Please look at your email.
I'm sorry, I'm nagging everybody, but it's something that I've forgotten in the past, so I know it's due, I think, at the end of the month.
Yep.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, thank you, Susan. Thank you.
For reminding.
Yeah.
Thank you, Susan.
All right. Any I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Yeah, thanks guys. Have a great night. And we'll be in touch, okay?
All right, good night.
Good night,
Great
everybody.
meeting all of you.
Bye now.
Thanks everyone for setting it up.
Yeah, Eileen, before we go, so once the recording processes, I'll send you a link and then you can download it.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Betsy.
Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it. I think this really went well, and I really appreciate everybody's participation and patience.
Yeah, thank
This
you.
conference is no longer being recorded.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Stay safe, everyone.
Take care.